The farmers' protest ongoing in the national capital and in and around Delhi. Now, farmers from Haryana, Punjab and UP are embarking on a march towards Delhi. They have almost reached Delhi borders in certain areas to put pressure on the government into accepting their demands, including a legal guarantee for minimum support price or MSP for crops. Over 200 unions are heading and marching towards Delhi today after inconclusive talks with the union ministers. To deter the planned march, authorities in Haryana have reinforced the state's borders with Punjab in Ambala, Jind, Fatehpur, Kurukshetra and Sirsa, employing concrete blocks, iron nails and even barbed wires in some cases. The farmers are demanding to encompass a legal guarantee for minimum support price or MSP, implementation of the Swaminathans Commission's recommendations, pensions for all farmers and farm labourers, as well as farm debt waiver, among other issues. How feasible economically are these demands, and whether government will give in to these demands? Those, of course, questions we're pondering over. Joining me is Kartik Malhotra. I believe also Professor Arun Kumar has joined us at the moment. But before I go to Professor Kumar, let's set the context right, Kartik, for our audience at the moment. This is not like your 22-21 protest of the farmers, where farmers were demanding, of course, apart from an MSP and a legal guarantee for MSP, they were also demanding repeal of the 3 farm laws. That was done. This is a protest for entirely different matter apart from the MSP issue.
I mean, Shweta, unfortunately, we are right now in a situation where month after month, year after year, demands just keep adding. How is it that if you were if the government did give in to your demands in 2020 and 2021, and you're right, the issues are very different then, because there were laws which were proposed by the government of India which should have worked in better compliance with fair market practices. It could have ensured better income for farmers by way of farm produce getting the optimal demand supply driven equilibrium price when they took it to the market, and at the same time the mandis, in any case, which were proposed to be tax free for the farmers. In addition to that, there was going to be this cutting of the middlemen, so that direct access to mandi for farmers could have helped them get better prices. But I think the farmers continue to live in a socialist era where they want this protection to come from the government. They want the government to have an MSP set so that whatever vagaries of upside or downside for their lives is something that the government absorbs. I mean, what kind of a dreamland are we living in, Shweta? Honestly, you know, which government can afford the kind of ask that the farmers are putting up this time around?
Okay.
It was a very different matter in 2020, 2021, but now you want MSP, and you want MS Swaminathans Formula to be applied, which is C2 plus 50%. Is there any industry that works on a 50% margin?
Okay, let's take that question from Professor Arun Kumar. Professor Kumar, thank you very much for taking time out. I think a pertinent question here from Kartik at this point in time. Does it even look economically feasible to give in to the asks of farmers? A C2 plus 50%, a 50% commission over and above. Government is saying that we cannot afford it.
Well, that's not true. I mean, let's look at the macro picture. The macro picture is that large number of people are dependent on agriculture, and their incomes have been going down. If I remember right, in the economic survey of 2015-16, it was shown while the value of output of agriculture is going up, the value addition is going down in agriculture, and that's why the incomes of farmers are not rising. And even recently, you know, in the budget, we saw that the real wages of workers in agriculture have more or less stagnated or even declined in the last many years. So you see, the problem is that agriculturists are complaining that their incomes have gone down rather than going up. The workers are complaining that their incomes are not rising or they've even gone down. So, you know, if 46% of the workers who are in the, agriculture sector, out of the total employment in the economy, if their incomes are not rising, if the farmers' incomes, and there are about 11 crore farmers in the country, according to one survey, there are different surveys between 8 crore and 13 crore, but suppose it's 11 crore. So what we are talking about is 11 crore farmers, we're talking about 46% of the workforce. If their incomes are down, then that leads to a shortage of demand in the economy, that leads to lower capacity utilization of industry, and that leeds to a slowdown in the economy.
Okay.
Professor Arun Kumar, my only question to you,
just
sir,
let me complete. In
sure.
2017-18, in Q4, you had an 8% rate of growth, and that fell to 3.1% in 2019-20 Q4 before the pandemic. And the reason it goes down, so dramatically is because of shortfall of demand. I remember even FICCI and CII at that point were asking that we expand our fiscal deficit to boost the demand in the economy. Now that kind of demand, has never been made by industry. So industry is suffering, and that's why you see the problem must be looked at from the macro perspective. The question is, can we afford to give the prices that they are demanding? Now that depends on the macro perspective we implement. We must also remember that industry has what's called markup pricing, whereas agriculture has demand and supply pricing. This difference which has been there in the agriculture and non-agriculture sector is the reason why the problem arises. If people at the lower levels of income had the purchasing power, then the demand for food would rise and the price would go automatically above the MSP price that is fixed by the government. But because poor people have low incomes, the demand for food is less, and that's why we have huge stocks of food. At one point, 110 million tons of food stocks were there, whereas we need 25 million tons of food stocks for our food security.
Professor
So
Kumar,
if
if I may
10
just
million
come in,
tons
sir,
of food stocks,
in
then the FCI has to be given huge subsidies, and your budgetary subsidy increases dramatically at that
Professor
point of time.
Kumar, if I can just step in at this moment in the interest of time, sir, my only simple question is who's going to pay for all this? I mean, are we looking at the government collecting more taxes from tax-paying citizens like Shweta and me and presumably you and Dr. Subhash Chandra Garg as well? Or should the government continue to subsidize a section of society which in any case does not pay any tax on farm income? Who's eventually going to underwrite the demands of the farmers?
And who bears the burden of it?
And what happened in 2014-15 is 10 years ago. So present day, if you're looking at our fiscal deficit target to be contained at what 4.5% next year in the year 2025, and if you're looking at not penalizing tax-paying citizens even more by increasing the tax, and in addition to all the subsidies that exist by way of PM Kisan, the subsidy on fertilizers, etc., how are we going to underwrite these demands?
Well, if actually you didn't give the PM Kisan subsidy and so on, and instead of that, you actually...
So 2.5 lakh crore rupees allocated for PM Kisan, I mean, that's a large number. Our total outlay for infrastructure development is only about 11 lakh crore rupees for this coming year.
Absolutely.
I mean, that is part of the interim
Professor
budget.
Kumar, I just want a quick question from you, sir. We are given to understand at this point from a variety of sources that if the government were to relent to MSP on all crop and the guarantee for it would, dent the government coffers to the tune of about 10 lakh crore rupees, which is close to the budget of the total infra budget that the country has allocated
And
in
10 lakh
this
crore
year.
rupees already is the fertilizer subsidy outlay in any case.
So,
That's
do those numbers sound correct to you?
No, that's not true. That's not true at all.
What would be the correct number, sir?
The subsidy element will go down if you give MSP to all crops. What's happening today is that out of the 23 crops for which the MSP is declared, it's only implemented in 3. That is in wheat and paddy and sugarcane. And that's why you have a higher profitability for these crops and you have excess stocks. And that's why at one point you had 110 million tons of stocks and you had to give a few lakh crores of subsidy to the Food Corporation of India. If you gave MSP to all crops, then all crops will have equal, profitability, and there will be a switch from the sugarcane and paddy to other crops which are imported at the moment. So import bill will go down, and the stock holding will be very negligible. And
okay, so if you're suggesting, Professor Kumar, I agree with you. If you're suggesting that
the incomes of farmers will go up if you gave MSP to all crops. You wouldn't have to give the subsidy to the kisans that you're giving at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, as long as we are able to pull out the subsidies and as long as we are able to put taxes on farm income and offer MSP, I think it should be a win-win situation. But I think the expectation, correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe Mr. Subhash Chandra Garg can come in here, but the expectation is that in addition to whatever SOPs the farm sector is getting, it adds this 50% C2 plus 50% MSP.
No, this will switch from one kind of subsidy to another, and it'll actually decline.
But I don't think anybody is talking about the switch, sir. They're talking about additional MSP in addition to all the subsidies.
In the market conditions, what I'm saying, the market condition will be such that the price would automatically go above the MSP.
Sir, if we had to follow fair market practices, then the farm laws of 2020 would not have had to be repealed, because that was one move towards ensuring that the demand-supply equilibrium is fair and square.
No, that's not true. I mean, what was being done was trade was being handed over to the corporate sector, and that's what the farmers and the artiyas were objecting to. And the point is that small farmers do not have market power. And because they don't
Okay.
have market power in the free market, they would not have got even the MSP. And Bihar is a prime example. In Bihar, you withdrew the APMC in 2005, and the Bihar farmers last year were getting half the price that farmers in Haryana and Punjab were getting. So nowhere in the world is it the case that, without government subsidy, the agriculture sector is able to survive. In EU, there are
Right.
billions, hundreds of billions of dollars of subsidy. In the US, there are hundreds of billions of dollars of subsidy. So the farming sector has to be made self-supporting through better implementation of
I mean, no
the
doubt,
pricing
Professor
mechanism.
Kumar. Obviously, the farming sector has to be made more self-sufficient and also self-sustaining in a way. But is MSP on all crop the only answer? Let's quickly get in Subhash Chandra Garg also into this conversation. Mr. Garg, you heard what Professor Arun Kumar said, and he reiterated that subsidies will perhaps be substituted by MSP on all crop. Would you agree? Does that make mathematic and revenue sense to you? You've been at the helm of affairs, sir. It does. Government of India has enough money in its coffers to shell out that 10 lakh crore rupees and to dole out subsidy and MSP for all crops.
I think it's not a correct question to ask. I think the government is too much into the agriculture sector. It's time the government should get out a good deal out of this agriculture. You see, on the input side, we subsidize almost everything. Take it from the seed to water to electricity to fertilizer, you name anything. Everything is subsidized to the extent of 90% to even 100%. Water is 100% subsidized, electricity, etc., is 90%, fertilizer in our country is 80% plus. So there is complete subsidization of the inputs. On the output side is what the MSP is. Again, MSP in 2019 was sort of brought for all the crops now. Every crop, it's a different matter that because the administrative reasons or the inability to procure or the nature of certain crops being such that you can't procure and keep it in store, for example, millets, etc., will deteriorate very quickly. That the MSP system operates only for about 3 to 4 crops primarily. But whatever it is, the MSP, if you make it completely out of market related, like what the demand is essentially that today the MSP is decided on the basis of the what is known as A2 plus FL cost, which is all the paid costs plus the imputed value of labor of the farmers. So the farmer works on his field, but it is his value of the labor is accounted for, and on that 50% margin is if you build on further notional values like rentals of the land used.
Then you're looking at 100% margin, sir. You're looking at pretty much 100% margin in that case. I think which sector, which industry works at a 50% margin, and that too with notional costs.
More than that, that price is completely unaligned with the market price, which is determined by the demand and supply. We have massive surplus in most of the crops now in comparison to demand. That is why most of the time, these days are a little different as far as cereals are concerned, but most of the years you have cereal prices in market which are lesser than what it is in the MSP. So if you do this, the result would be that you end up with the government buying at very high prices, completely unaligned with the market. And what do you do with it? You do it with further subsidies.
So and then you have your Garib Kalyan Yojana, and then you have your Ahar Yojana. So eventually then you're buying it higher and then giving it for free in any case to people who need it.
Yes, Professor Kumar.
Two basic problems.
I think Mr. Garg is saying something. Let me speak after him.
Yeah, so let me complete. So what is our real problem in the agriculture sector? There are two problems to my mind. there is too much of labor or farmers involved in doing agriculture in India. All over the world, the agriculture now has about only 3 to 5% at best of the labor share. We have 50% plus. And the second is that the agriculture fundamentally is financially unprofitable for most part of it. And therefore, we need to get a lot of people out of agriculture to non-agricultural activities. That will improve the earnings of the farmers. And secondly, make the agriculture a little more market oriented. Too much of governmentalized agriculture is what is the problem. So I think these are the solutions, not the artificially inflated MSPs, to my mind.
Absolutely. We'll come to maybe the formula subsequently of, A2 plus FL and C2 plus 50%. But Professor Arun Kumar, I want to understand from you, we'll come back to the MSP issue. But what about the other demands which the farm community is now raising, which is with respect to pension and with respect to debt waivers? I mean, aren't we really looking at breaching the line a little too much now?
No, you see, if farmers' incomes are better, then the demand for pension would go down, and the debt waivers will also go down.
Sir, why should the farmers expect? Why should the farmers expect special treatment for them? No other sector expects. The gig economy doesn't expect it. No other casual labor expects it. Why does the farm community expect better services from the government, especially for them?
Because every sector of the economy gets concession, like industry gets land cheap, industry gets water
so
concession,
does farmers.
electricity concession. No. But the point is that you see the industry has a monopoly position. It's able to determine its own prices, what's called markup pricing. Agriculture is not able to do that because in no mandi does any farmer have.
Which is what was proposed in 2020, sir. Which is what was proposed in 2020 by way of the three farm laws.
That was not what was proposed in 2020. 2020 was marketing. 2020 had nothing to do with production. You see, so therefore we must separate what was done in 2020 and what's the demand today. The point I'm making is that you see the farmers suffer because the demand is low. And why is the demand low? Because it's poverty. If there was less of poverty, there'd be much greater demand for food and food prices would rise. You know, in India, the per capita consumption, calorific consumption is 2,000 kilocalories, whereas in USA and China, it's more than 3,000 kilocalories.
Okay.
You know, there the poor people are able to afford much more food. Whereas in India, there's large amount of hunger and poverty, and that's why 80 crore farmers, poor people have to be given 5 kilo of wheat and paddy and so on and so forth. So if you got rid of poverty, the demand for food would go up, and then the prices would automatically go above MSP.
You know, agreed, sir. But does that all stop with farmers getting more concessions by the way of pension, by the way of MSP, by the way of debt waivers? Is that the solution you're proposing?
No. The point is you must increase the demand for food by giving people at the lower level purchasing power. Then the incomes would go up, and farmers, they wouldn't need to demand any of this.
So are you suggesting, sir, that
because the food prices are kept low actually, and why are food prices kept low actually? Because business and middle class and upper middle class want cheap labor. Because
so, sir,
you see that
are you eventually suggesting as an economist that the government should be printing more money and doling that money out into the hands of the people to boost demand and repeat the mistakes that the Western economies made during COVID?
You haven't heard what I said. I said that demand for subsidy go down if the food prices go above the MSP. The government only be procuring at the margins. You won't need to keep 100 million tons of food stocks. You only need to keep 25 million tons of food stocks. Therefore, the subsidy element would go down. There'd be better environmental protection because you won't be growing, crops that are not suited to the environment. Like in Punjab, you won't be growing paddy. In Maharashtra, you won't be growing sugarcane. You'll be growing, oil seed, you'll be growing other things which you are importing at the moment. So giving MSP to all crops and giving living wage to workers would actually change the macroeconomics of the country. And therefore, the macroeconomics is the level at which you have to look at the farmers' demands. You can't look at it piecemeal, at the MSP or at the pensions or at the debt waiver and so on. These are all interrelated to the macroeconomics, and it is not correct that the farmers don't pay tax. If you keep the prices down, actually that itself is a tax, and if you have indirect taxes, that also is being paid on fertilizer and various other things. Fertilizer, of course, is a subsidy, but the point is that on various other inputs that they get, there's a tax. So it's not that the farmers don't pay any taxes.
All right, farmers protest. Farmers are continuing their protest. This is looking like a relook of what could have happened in 20 and 2021. Just about 2 to 3 years from now, we saw farmers in huge numbers, Kartik. They were stranded here. They were here on their own accord, of course, and demanding the repealing of 3 farm laws as well as minimum guarantee on MSP. Government was able to repeal those farm laws, was able to convince them to go back, and discussions started. It's been 3 years since then, and we are back to square one. Although the issues at this point in time are slightly different, some would even say farmers are pushing too hard.
No, I mean, it definitely seems like the farmers are pushing too hard. And how long can any government, can any economy continue to subsidize or give sops or dole out incentives to any sector? Farm sector, of course, being a very, very critical, very large base in India. India still largely an agrarian economy, and the fact that it is for any political party also a large vote bank suggests that all governments want to keep the farm sector happy, right? But the point really is that there has to be an out date for subsidies. There has to be, even on MSP, you agree, let's say hypothetically the government does agree to an MSP. Let's say the government does agree to the Swaminathans formula of C2 plus 50%. I don't know what would be the delta between what the government is using right now and if they were to go to the Swaminathans formula, but there has to be an out point for these subsidies.
Absolutely.
Is it going to be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? What is the kind of money that the government will have to eventually spend in addition to the subsidies already in place, in addition to the pension now being demanded, in addition to what is the size of the total farm debt at the moment across banks, across cooperative banks and nationalized banks? That is something which has to be budgeted for. You cannot randomly come, take the city hostage, pretty much, keep traffic, keep residents, citizens
Economic activity.
and economic
And
activity.
to earn-
Schools, for example. I mean,
Absolutely.
schools are shut yesterday, schools in Noida are shut tomorrow as well. I mean, there has to be some sort of a discipline, there has to be some discretion, and there has to be some way of getting your message across. And every few years, you can't take to the roads, you can't get into an agitation.
Come to think of it, Kartik, protest is the right of Indians. As Indians, it is our fundamental right
You
to
block
protest.
highways, you have people coming in thousands, blocking highways,
And that is the
blocking
more
economic
peaceful way of,
activity.
no, I mean, that is the more fundamental peaceful way of doing things. So farmers have a right to protest. The question is whether what they're protesting over sounds mathematically, economically correct or not. So let's get get that clarification from Mr. Subhash Chandra Garg, who's been patiently waiting here. Mr. Garg, let's delve a little bit deeper on the Swaminathans formula, and alluding to Kartik's question on what would be the delta between what the government is currently calculating and MS Swaminathan's formula of C2 plus 50%. What is the delta we are looking at? What sort of more monies will the government will have to shell out in order to meet that demand?
So, as I said earlier, the A2 and FL cost and the C2 costs plus FL and 50%. So, I think the Agriculture Prices Commission does some study. I'm not very familiar at this time that what exactly would make the difference. But I'll give you the perspective from a little different point. That what is the rut we have got into? We basically procure the wheat and rice as the two crops which are procured largely. There's small purchases of oil, seed, pulses, but primarily it's wheat and rice. The market value of the wheat and rice, if you take all the crop which we produce in the country, we end up buying about 50-60% of that as the MSP crop. And the subsidies, if you calculate all that which is being given in different forms, on the input side, the interest subsidies, the fertilizer subsidies, the electricity subsidies and all, these are basically used for wheat and rice, though there are other crops also which are there, but largely used. Our calculations suggested that the subsidy is actually equal to something like 70 to 80% of the total value of the crop of these two. This is insane, so much of subsidies. And we have complicated the system by every which way. As I said, all the input subsidies and the output side, the MSPs, then on top of that you have the PM Kisan and other things. a much simpler and perhaps which may move towards what Mr. Arun Kumar was also saying, that across the giving the farmers the real choice to plant what they feel like, what works for them economically, rather than these MSP considerations and other subsidy considerations, is that if you consolidate all these subsidies and give as one single payment, take out everything in the form of subsidies, fertilizer, seeds, electricity, and everything, and give them that, the farmers would perhaps end up getting more in cash what they today get in different forms, and even as the crop value.
But
And
sir, if you
then
give them
let them
cash in
grow.
hand, sir, sorry, I just want to barge in for just one sec. If you give them cash in hand, aren't you making the incentive to work and produce more output, more disincentivized? How do you incentivize people to work if you're giving them cash in hand, sir?
Actually, this works precisely to achieve the objectives which you are saying. Imagine that I have the cash, let us say per hectare about 20,000 or 30,000 rupees per hectare is my income.
Yeah.
Uh, and for that, I have to do all these production of rice, wheat, etc., and then take it to sale and to claim this benefit. Now, if you have this much income from you in cash, then you can think of moving out of the agriculture and take up other professions and vocations and rent out or lease out. We should also reform these restrictive laws which we have in the country. You can't lease out today. You can't sell very freely the agricultural land. If you, and then it can actually get consolidated, and a lot of people will move out of the agriculture to do other things, which will
Okay.
increase their income. And if anywhere, whatever crops gives you
But
better
sir, my
return.
question is, what is stopping them from doing that already? I mean, if you have the opportunity to move out and do other work, then that 20,000 rupees per hectare is not going to be something which is right now stopping them from doing it. Obviously, the farmers
Precisely,
are seeing value in the subsidies, they are seeing value in not paying taxes, and now hoping for an MSP and debt waiver to come in, so that they don't have to actually do the toil beyond what they are comfortable with already, and live in their house, work on their farm, go home. I mean, I know it's easier said than done, but somehow it doesn't seem very prudent that if that was something that the farming community was aspiring to do, what would have stopped them from doing that already?
So this is, see today there is a lot of mistaken understanding that farmers are rich. They are getting a lot of income without doing any work in the form of subsidies, etc. And
Sir, I'm just talking pure opportunity cost. They see, I mean, what is, in pure economic terms, sir, opportunity cost. They are better off doing agriculture with all the subsidies intact as opposed to the next best option.
So if you flip it, that you can have the subsidy for the land which you own, and then you have the freedom to do either agriculture, do whatever you feel like in agriculture, or move out of the agriculture. That would increase their incomes, that would
Okay.
increase their options, rather than the remaining trapped in the agriculture. Why we have 50% of the people working in agriculture in the country today?
All right, Professor Arun Kumar, let's assume for a moment that the government does relent and guarantees MSP on all 23 crops. Eventually, one of the concerns that a lot of economists also have at the moment is we're looking at if government is going to buy all the produce in all 23 crops, we're looking at wastage of some scarce resources. We are looking at patterns in agriculture also taking a dent, and more importantly, incentives for other farmers to grow other crops also diminishes quite drastically. Come to think of it, that minimum guarantee of an MSP on all 23 crops, all in all, may not be beneficial for farming community and for government.
No, that's why I said you have to look at the macro picture. There is no solution to agriculture within agriculture without looking at the macro picture. The first thing is, why is demand low for agriculture produce? And that is because you see, National Health and Family Survey shows that 30% women are malnourished, 40% children are malnourished. That means 30 to
And
40%
are all of them
family.
farmers, sir? Are you suggesting that all of them are farmers?
Bulk of them, because poverty lies in the agriculture sector, so bulk of them are actually from the working and the farming community. Now, what that suggests is the demand for food is low, and that's why food prices tend to be below the MSP, and that's why the farmers have to ask for an MSP and for the implementation of the MSP. And as you rightly say, it's not good enough to implement it for 23 crops. You have to implement it for almost all the 200 crops. Some of them will be difficult to implement because they're perishable, but for other crops, it should be possible. It's an administrative question. Second point is that you see outside.
Are we also not looking at huge wastage, sir?
No. Wastage will reduce because you'll have diversification of crop. You won't be producing so much of paddy and wheat. You'll be producing other things which you are today importing because there's shortage of those. Plus, when the consumption rises,
But the demand for one type of crop would always be more than demand for other type of crop.
No, not at all. If you have equal profitability, then it'll be as per the weather patterns and the socio-weather patterns of those climatic zones. So therefore, you'll have a more balanced amount of output in the economy if all crops had the same profitability as today, paddy and wheat.
But the reason why you have government procuring more wheat and rice is because there's more demand for wheat and rice.
No, it's not because of that. It is because you have greater production, because you have greater profitability in those crops. That's why you end up having 110 million tons of stock at one point, and even now you have 55 million tons where you need 25 million tons.
Isn't there greater stock because there is a likelihood of greater demand, and hence you need to keep those stockpiles of reserve? And wasn't that one of the reasons why we actually stopped export of rice and before that export of wheat?
The problem really lies in lack of enough demand from the poor people, and that's why we are consuming 2,000 kilocalories, whereas in China and the US, etc., people consume 300 kilocalories.
But sir, with MSP and with increased demand and with crop diversification, which would ensure fewer supplies of wheat and rice, what is going to happen to inflation, and will the poor still be able to afford it?
The poor will be able to afford it because you give them a living wage. No, because of you'll be giving them a living wage. So it's a package. You have to give the workers a living wage. You have to give the farmers an MSP, which will be based on the full cost pricing. The second point is that outside agriculture, employment is not available. That's why the labor force participation rate in India is around 45%, whereas in similar countries like Brazil, China, and the US, it's 70% or thereabouts. So there are 25% less people in the workforce today in India because work is not available. So therefore, they're not able to leave agriculture. That's why you have what is called the disguised unemployment in agriculture. People are not able to leave agriculture and go for other work because it's just not available. So,
sir,
in other words,
it's data because it's notional, right? You're not employing.
The problem is that you see the macro picture is not being looked at unless you look at the macro picture of output, prices, investment, and employment. You will not find a solution. Agriculture is too large to be just looked at.
How do you arrive at employment simply because you have family members employed? They are not eligible for EPFO. They are not even eligible to pay income taxes. So when you're employing family members, it is obviously notional employment, right? How do you ever factor that in?
You have got it wrong. You are talking about the organized sector. It's the unorganized sector where the people are working. 94% are working in the unorganized sector. Only 6% are in the organized sector. EPFO, etc. applies only to the formal sector.
I know, sir. That is what I'm saying. How do you account for employment or unemployment figures when you talk about the farm sector simply because it is the unorganized sector? And what is the guarantee that you give them doles, they move out of agriculture and they do not still join the formal economy?
They won't, because there's just no jobs available outside agriculture. If there were jobs available, 40% farmers have been saying since 2002 that they want to quit agriculture because it's a loss-making endeavor, but they're not able to quit. And that's why you have massive disguised unemployment in agriculture.
Mr. Garg is smiling away at your argument. I don't know whether he's in agreement or disagreement. Mr. Garg, last minute before the show ends, what is your level of agreeing with Professor Arun Kumar?
So, Professor Arun Kumar, if I have understood him, he is coming from the demand side, which is a legitimate argument that you need to raise the demand. Poor are not able to consume enough because they don't have income and they don't create that kind of demand. If he is coming from that side, I think it's a legitimate point.
But sir, higher demand, wouldn't it mean higher prices on the demand supply curve? Wouldn't higher demand lead to higher prices, the equilibrium being inflated?
Let me explain that. So, but that such objective perhaps cannot be achieved by raising MSP or giving the MSPs as a guaranteed. Farmers' income cannot be raised, to my mind, by this artificial construct of the MSP. The other argument which he used was that if MSP is available for all the crops, that was what was done in 2018. All the field crops, all 23 of them, were brought within this formula of 50% profit on the A2 plus FL cost. And the idea was that at that time, I was in the system still, that once you bring the profitability across all the crops to a neutral state, the farmers will probably shift and grow what they consider as the most profitable in their agroclimatic conditions. But the fact of the matter is that actually you don't buy those crops. The remaining crops are not bought, and if you can't buy, the guarantee of a MSP, 50% profit, is as good as notional. No one believes it. And this talk about making it a legal guarantee is still superfluous. What do you legally implement? You will go to the court for implementing this. I think we are messing up the agriculture situation by more and more of the intrusion and the
Okay.
interference.
All right, as sound as this debate is, and as much as we would like to continue listening to Professor Arun, Kumar and Subhash Chandra Garg, I have to say goodbye. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining in, for your inputs on that story. That is, of course, a building story, a story of debate. It has brought lots of farmers, hordes of farmers back again on streets. They are near the national capital region, and they continue to move Delhi, or Dilli Chalo, as the popular slogan goes, to ensure that their demands are met. We'll keep bringing all those updates on News 9. Thank you very much for watching.